6 wheels. Not 4, 6. And that's before we even talk about the rest of it. What you're looking at right now is one of the most menacing, most intentional motorhome concepts I've had the chance to break down on this channel. Every single surface on this thing has been designed to make you feel something. And what it makes me feel is that whoever imagined this was not thinking about campgrounds. They were thinking about something closer to a private jet that happens to have wheels. Full transparency before we go any further, this is an AI-generated concept design. It doesn't exist in any factory, nobody's building it, nobody's selling it. It's pure imagination. And honestly, that's exactly what makes it worth a serious breakdown. Because when you remove real-world constraints, you see what design could become if money and physics weren't the final bosses. Here's what we're doing today. Full exterior walk-around, interior construction based on what we can read from the outside, powertrain logic, and at the very end, I'll tell you the one detail on this concept that I think is genuinely ahead of its time. Stay with me, because there is something happening at the rear of this vehicle that I want to save until we get there. And once I point it out, you won't be able to unsee it. Let's start at the front, because the front face of this concept is doing something that I find genuinely bold. That grille, or what reads as a grille, is enormous, hexagonal framing, deeply recessed with a graphic precision that pulls more from the world of high-end German sedans than anything you'd find on a traditional motorhome. It's almost confrontational in scale. And those headlight signatures, thin, blade-like, with the amber DRL strip cutting diagonally down into the lower fascia, that's not random. That's a designer making a very deliberate argument that a vehicle of this size deserves to look like it could keep up with anything on the road. And maybe it can. The lower front bumper is deeply sculpted, 3 distinct air intake zones with a chin spoiler that sits remarkably close to the ground for something this tall. Why does that matter to you? Because that low front underbody treatment is managing airflow from the very first point of contact. In a vehicle with this much frontal area, every bit of air management at the nose directly affects how stable this thing feels at 70 miles per hour. Less turbulence underneath means a more planted, confident ride. Now let's move down the side, and this is where the proportion story gets really interesting. That greenhouse, the glass section, runs almost the full length of the habitable zone in one continuous, nearly uninterrupted band. There's a chrome cap rail across the top, separating the dark glass from the darkened roof section above. And when you think about what that band of glass means for the person living inside this thing, that's not just aesthetics. That is your connection to the world around you. Waking up in the morning with landscape running the full width of your visual field instead of staring at a wall. That's a lifestyle decision built directly into the architecture of the glass. The body panels are finished in what appears to be a near-black, deep graphite, somewhere between dark gunmetal and midnight obsidian. And in this lighting environment, the way the panels catch and hold light is exceptional. You get these long, slow highlights traveling down the body side as the light source shifts, which tells me the panel curvature is very gentle, very controlled. No sharp creases, no dramatic character lines trying to add drama through aggression. This design earns its drama through sheer scale and restraint. And then there's the 6-wheel configuration, and this is the detail I want you to really sit with for a second. Most motorhomes of this class run on a tandem rear axle setup, 4 rear wheels, 2 front. What we appear to have here is a true 6-wheel layout with what looks like an additional steered axle at the front, possibly a tag axle in the rear zone as well. In a real engineering scenario, that additional axle distributes weight more evenly, and on a vehicle likely exceeding 15,000 kilograms loaded, that's not a luxury, it's a necessity. It also allows for a longer wheelbase without sacrificing turning geometry, meaning this thing could be significantly longer than it appears without becoming undrivable in tight spaces. The wheels themselves are enormous, multi-spoke designs in gloss black, almost too aggressive for the body, but in the best way possible. They look like they belong on a performance SUV that somehow grew to the size of a building. The roofline deserves its own moment. It's flat, almost perfectly flat, with a very subtle forward-raked leading edge and what appears to be a flush integrated panel strip running the full length in a darker tinted material. I'll come back to that roof in the powertrain section because I think there's something happening up there that changes the entire energy story of this concept. The stance is low, impossibly low for something this size. Whatever suspension geometry is working underneath, air ride, active hydraulic, it would have to be working overtime to bring the floor this close to the ground. But the result is something that reads more like a luxury lounge on wheels than a tall wall buckstruck. The exterior alone makes this one of the more visually sophisticated concepts I've analyzed on this channel. But honestly, the exterior is just the opener. What I think is happening inside this thing, based on what these proportions are telling me, is where this gets genuinely interesting.
Now, no interior images of this concept exist, but that's actually fine. Because the exterior of a vehicle like this tells you an enormous amount about what the designer was thinking when they imagined the inside. Think of it as reading the cover before opening the book. And this cover is telling me a very specific story. Let me walk you through what I think is almost certainly happening in here, based entirely on what the proportions and design philosophy are suggesting. Ceiling height first. Based on the exterior roofline relative to the six-wheel stance, I'd estimate the interior ceiling sits somewhere between 2.1 and 2.3 meters. In practical terms, that's full stand-up height with room to spare for most people. In a motorhome, that single dimension is the difference between feeling like you're staying somewhere and feeling like you're surviving somewhere. The moment you can stand fully upright and walk naturally through your living space without instinctively ducking, everything changes. It stops being camping. It starts being living. That glass band running along the side would translate to windows sitting roughly at eye level for a standing adult and extending well above seating height. In the living zone, that means natural light flooding in from floor to approximately shoulder height on both sides. There would be no artificial lighting tricks needed during daylight hours. The light quality inside would be genuinely good. Natural, directional, warm depending on orientation. That's not a small thing. That's your daily mood. Now let's walk through the layout as I'd expect to see it. Given the length, based on those proportions, I'd estimate somewhere in the 12 to 14 meter range for the full vehicle. The habitable zone likely begins just behind the cockpit bulkhead and runs for roughly 8 to 9 meters. That's a lot of floor space. In that zone, I'd expect the designer to have imagined something close to a traditional hotel suite layout, broken into 3 distinct zones moving from front to rear: a social/living area, a sleeping zone, and a wet area at the back. The living area, immediately behind the cockpit, would almost certainly feature full-width seating. In a concept this ambitious, you're probably imagining something close to a custom lounge configuration. Think L-shaped seating that converts, a dining surface that folds or slides, and a media wall that drops or retracts. In the world of this concept, the materials would be playing at the level of a private aviation interior: leather, real wood, machined aluminum details. Not because it's showing off, but because the person imagining this vehicle understands that materials communicate quality in a way that dimensions alone cannot. Moving rearward, the sleeping zone. Based on roof height and body width, a full queen or king format fixed bed is realistic here. Fixed, not fold down. The distinction matters. A fixed bed in a motorhome means you never have to choose between a dining table and a place to sleep. You don't pack and unpack your own bedroom every night. You just have a bedroom. In something designed at this ambition level, that's a non-negotiable call the designer would have made. The kitchen, and in a concept this scaled, I'd call it a galley kitchen in the best sense, would sit somewhere in the mid-body zone, likely running along one side to preserve the visual through line of the space. Induction surfaces, integrated refrigeration, a compact combination oven. The key design challenge in any motorhome kitchen is maintaining the connection between the kitchen user and the rest of the social space. And based on what the exterior proportions suggest about interior width, a galley layout here could work beautifully. You cook, but you're not isolated. The bathroom, and this is where concepts of this ambition have historically either impressed or failed completely, I'd expect a full wet bath configuration, separate shower enclosure with enough headroom to actually use it. In a concept this bold, it would be criminal not to imagine a full-size vanity, not a folding shelf above the toilet, a proper surface. In practical engineering terms, that requires somewhere between 1.8 and 2.2 square meters of floor plan, which at this vehicle length is completely achievable. The cockpit. Based on what we can see from the exterior, that huge panoramic windscreen, the commanding front face, the driver's environment would be extraordinary. Near full-width glass across the front means a visual field that most truck drivers would genuinely envy. In the conceptual world this vehicle inhabits, I'd expect a semi-autonomous driving interface, heads-up display projection onto the lower windscreen zone, haptic steering, possibly full autonomous capability for highway stretches. Not because it's a gimmick, because in a vehicle this size, reducing driver fatigue on long hauls isn't optional. It's a safety argument dressed up in technology. Climate, connectivity, smart systems. In this concept, I'd expect full zonal climate control, meaning the cockpit, the living zone, and the sleeping zone can each be tuned independently, and a 5G connectivity hub that allows full remote work capability, because whoever lives in something like this isn't hiding from the world. They're carrying it with them. The interior I'm describing isn't a fantasy, it's a logical extrapolation of what these proportions are promising. Obviously, this is still conceptual territory, but the spatial logic here is sound, and that's what makes it genuinely compelling to unpack.
Let's talk about what would actually move this thing, and this is where the fictional nature of the concept works fully in its favor, because a real manufacturer would have to pick one path. Here, we can imagine the best of all of them. The 6-wheel configuration is the first clue. In a real engineering scenario, a layout like this almost certainly points toward a dual-motor or tri-motor electric drivetrain. Why? Because with multiple axles, you have the option to individually power each one, which gives you torque vectoring across all 6 wheels. In plain terms, this thing could theoretically distribute power with extraordinary precision, keeping all 6 wheels contributing efficiently, whether you're on a smooth motorway or a loose gravel road. For a vehicle of this mass, that's not just performance, that's safety. Now, that roof. The flat, flush panel running the full length of the top of this vehicle is almost certainly intended as an integrated solar surface. If the designer allocated the full available roof area, which based on exterior proportions could be somewhere in the range of 20 to 25 square meters, and used current generation high-efficiency solar panels, you're looking at a meaningful daily energy contribution, not enough to power the vehicle's primary drive, but potentially enough to run all interior systems, climate, lighting, appliances, connectivity, indefinitely while stationary. That's off-grid capability that actually matters. You park this somewhere beautiful, and you could stay there for weeks without plugging into anything. If this were ever engineered for reality, the primary battery pack would need to be substantial.
We're talking about a vehicle likely in the 15,000 kilogram class. The closest real-world equivalent in electric heavy transport would suggest a pack in the 500 to 800 kilowatt-hour range to achieve a realistic highway range of 300 to 400 kilometers between charges. That's a lot of cells, but the six-wheel platform actually helps here. The battery can be distributed across the entire chassis floor, lowering the center of gravity and freeing up interior living space above. Hydrogen fuel cell is the other conversation worth having. For a vehicle of this mass and this range ambition, hydrogen makes a compelling engineering argument: faster refueling than charging, better energy density by weight. The technology to make it work at this scale doesn't fully exist in production form yet, but the closest real-world equivalent, heavy goods fuel cell vehicles currently being developed, suggests it's closer than most people think. Hypothetically, if this ever left the render stage, the powertrain story alone would be worth an entire second video. All right, let me tell you where I actually land on this one. What this concept does genuinely well, and I don't say this lightly, is unified design language at scale. Most motorhomes, even expensive ones, feel like someone took a good-looking front end and welded it to a box. This concept reads as one coherent object from every angle. The front face, the side profile, the roofline, the stance, they're all speaking the same visual language. That kind of coherence is genuinely difficult to achieve at this vehicle length, and it's the single most impressive thing about what's been imagined here. What seems questionable? That ride height. The concept sits almost implausibly low for a vehicle of this mass and this six-wheel complexity. In reality, the suspension travel needed to absorb road imperfections at that weight while maintaining that stance would require an active hydraulic or air suspension system of serious sophistication. Not impossible, but expensive enough that even ultra-luxury clients would notice the line item. The one detail I find most impressive, and I promised I'd come back to this, is the relationship between the roofline and the glass. That flat, flush roof doesn't just sit on top of the glass band, it caps it in a way that makes the entire side of the vehicle feel like one continuous surface interrupted only by the glass itself. It's an architectural detail. It's the kind of decision a building designer would make, not a vehicle designer. And that cross-disciplinary thinking, bringing architectural visual logic into a moving vehicle, is genuinely ahead of where most concept motorhome design currently sits. If I could change one thing, the wheels. As aggressive and visually exciting as they are, I think the concept would read as even more sophisticated with a slightly calmer wheel design, something that let the bodywork do more of the talking. Right now, the wheels are competing for attention in a way that slightly undercuts the restraint everywhere else. What does all of this say about where luxury mobility is heading? It says that the next generation of premium mobile living isn't going to look like an RV. It's going to look like this: architecture-informed, technology-led, and designed without apology for people who refuse to compromise between comfort and movement. This will never exist exactly as you've seen it today, and that's fine. That's not the point. The point is what it makes you think about. It's a concept, it's fictional, it's AI-generated, and it's still one of the most considered mobile living visions I've broken down on this channel. Six-wheel drive, or would you take that same engineering budget and put it into a bigger battery pack for more range? Drop your answer below. I read every single one. And if this kind of deep dive concept analysis is what you come to YouTube for, there's a lot more of it on this channel, and subscribing is the simplest way to make sure you don't miss the next one.